Good morning, everyone. I see Justin Bellison's put that on in the chat of good morning. So good morning, Justin. Hey, I'm excited to be with you guys today. We're going to be talking about activities management, which is kind of a sly way of me probably saying some time management things. But the idea of this is what I want to go through with you guys. We're going to talk about how to keep track of your time. Now, this applies in your regular day-to-day real estate that you're going to be doing, meaning even once we're past this whole coronavirus and the COVID-19 and we are back to just doing our real estate sales, this is going to apply to what you are doing. But I also am going to fine tune it to apply to what we are living with and going through today in the world right now, and how you can keep track of your time and make sure that you are being effective with your time. Now, I want to share with you kind of where I got this and the idea behind it as we get started. I remember as a somewhat newer agent, I had probably been in the business, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years, somewhere in that range. And I had gone to a training where this guy trained on what I'm going to show you today. And as a result of that, what he had challenged me to do in this training was, he said, what I want you to do is I want you to keep track of your time on a 15-minute basis. So he asked me to, every 15 minutes, to be writing down what I am doing with my time. Now, you may or may not want to do it for yourself on these 15-minute increments, but I'll tell you, for me, it created a huge benefit in my business, because what I found out is how ineffective I was with my time as I was prospecting. So we're going to go through that. I'm going to teach you the process, show you what that looked like for me. And we'll get into some of the details on that in just a little bit. But here's where I want to start with. Keep in mind that there is no correlation to time and productivity, meaning that you can work a ton of hours and not be productive, whereas someone else might work few hours but be highly productive. Now, I'm going to refer to a bit today Brian Burnett, because this morning on the Morning Ascent, Brian Burnett was talking about how he's making, last year, 2019, he made $1.4 million. And he also, if you caught today, if you were watching, he said he tries to be home and is home probably 75% of the time by 6 o'clock every day. Now, usually what happens though is we as agents will tend to look at somebody that's doing that. So Brian Burnett making $1.4 million, and we would say to ourselves, wow, like that would be awesome, but I don't want to work that many hours, is usually what we say. Now, the truth is, based on what he talked about today, I don't think he is working that much harder than what you probably already are. The difference is what he is doing with his time and how he is effective with that time, meaning how much he's controlling that time. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, show you what you can do and how you can go about doing it. Because I'll tell you this, the difference between someone that is making $1.4 million a year, like what Brian Burnett is doing, so someone making $1.4 million a year, and somebody else that is doing just, $100,000 a year, there is not a huge difference between the amount of time put into the work between those two. And so really what it boils down to is our effective use of that time. All right, so we're going to get into that. So as we go through that though, and as really kind of a precursor to that, I need to help you understand a few principles about business management and time management things. And so I've got last week when we did the class, I just wrote on the board, which didn't seem to work real well. People couldn't see it. So I'm going to try something different today. So I'm going to share with you, I created a PowerPoint that I'm going to go through so that hopefully you can see this a little bit better than me writing on the board. Now, so here's where we're going to start with, is I'm going to share with you a couple of Parkinson's laws. So let me explain who this was. So C. Northcott Parkinson was a PhD student back in the 1930s. So he was working on his PhD in England in 1930. Now, during that time, what he was doing is he was studying the ports of Southampton. So he's studying the Royal Navy, basically. And as part of his PhD thesis, he's studying the Royal Navy to figure out what is it that they do that is good, but also what is it that they do that is not effective that he could then put into this PhD thesis. Well, what he did is he came up with a number of things that have now been termed as Parkinson's laws. So I'm going to share with you 2 of these laws that he found. And just keep in mind that what he was studying and looking at was the Royal Navy. Okay? So this first law that he came up with is called the law of expansion. On the law of expansion, what it says is this: work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Now, remember I said to you, when I learned this process, it made a huge impact on me. And the reason it did is because of this. Work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. What that means is that if we decide I am going to work X number of hours in real estate today, or this week, or this month, whatever it is, whatever time you decide you're going to work, what he found is work will expand so as to fill the time available for that completion. Now, so like I said, I'm going to distinguish between now, which a lot of you are working from home, versus being at the office. So for just the normal times without this home quarantine, what that means is if you say to yourself, I am going to show up and go to the office and be there from this time to this time, what will happen is you will show up to the office and be there from that time to that time. And work will expand to fill the time available for you to be able to complete that work. Oops, I'm jumping ahead there. So I'm going to take that off for a second. So what happens is work will expand for you to fill the time available for that completion. So you'll say, I'm going to go to the office and I'm going to be there till 4, 5, 6, whatever time it is. What will happen is you will go and show up and you will work to fill that time. And you will find busy work. I guess that's another way of saying it. Now, let me share with you what happened with me. Remember I said I started tracking my time in every 15-minute increments. And what I was doing is every 15 minutes, I would stop and write down what I did. Now, a lot of times you would look at that and think, well, that doesn't sound like a very effective use of your time, is every 15 minutes stopping to write it down, which you could argue that, but I would argue that it actually brings some things to light that creates for you to be so much more effective. So here's what happened, is I start doing that. Now, how I did it was I had a watch. I had the Ironman triathlete watch. And what I would do is on that watch, that Timex, it had a 15, you could set a timer to beep every 15 minutes. Now, a lot of people are using either an Apple Watch or some type of a smart watch. So you could do this still very easily today. But what would happen is I would set it to beep every 15 minutes. And then what would happen is after it beeped, I would pull out a piece of paper and I would write down what did I do from the last time it beeped until right now when it just beeped. And then I would classify that. Now I'll get into the classifying in just a little bit, but I would classify it as based on, was it productive, indirectly productive, or non-productive? And then I'd go back to doing whatever I was doing. When my watch beeped again, I would stop and write it down. Now, I did not do that while I was out showing property. If I was on a listing appointment, I would stop it from beeping. But I would just, as soon as that appointment was over, I would record what I had been doing on that time. So here's what happened though. So I go to work one day and I fill out the paper and I'm filling it out. This particular day I'm talking about now was a Monday. I had gotten a new listing over the weekend and I went into the office. I started doing all the paperwork for this new listing. Once I got done with the paperwork for the listing, I now was going to go over to the title company to order the preliminary title report. I jump up out of my seat. I go walking across. Now, the way that that worked at that time was the office that I was in, similar to the one I'm in now, had a title company in it. The one that I was in, though, was more of a strip mall, and there was a door that connected our office to the title company. And so I walked over to the title company, and now for the people in California, this would be the equivalent to opening escrow. In Utah, title and escrow are all done at the same company versus California, it's separate. I go walking over to the title company though to give them the order, to order the preliminary title report. So I walk in there. Well, the guy that I'm going in there to order the preliminary title report from had become a good friend of mine. So he started doing escrow work about the same time that I became a real estate agent, and we kind of just grew our businesses together. Well, we also had, my computer's falling off the stand. I got it on here. We also had sons that were about the same age, and this guy's name was Jeff. So I go over to visit with Jeff to give him this order for the title report. And we sit down and we just start talking about the weekend because our oldest sons are about the same age. So we're talking about the different sports that were going on. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we start talking about the weekend. Well, the whole time we're talking, my watch would beep and I would reset it. It would beep and I'd reset it. Well, we sat and talked and talked and talked. Well, I got up and left to go back to my desk. When I got back to my desk, my watch beeped again. I stopped it from beeping, and then I went to write down on my piece of paper what I had been doing since the last time I had written it down. Now, keep in mind, I'd gone over to his office. I didn't take the paper with me. So every time it beeped, I wasn't writing it down. I would just reset it. Well, when I got back to my office, and now I'm writing down, and I now have to look at how long and how much time I had spent over at the title company visiting. Now, any guesses? Now, I do have you guys to where you can unmute yourself. So I want you to interact and participate, ask questions, those type of things. So if you have questions or things, go ahead and unmute yourself and we'll talk. But so somebody unmute, and how long do you think I was over visiting at the title company? Any guesses?
An hour.
Okay, I heard an hour. And what'd you say, David?
An hour.
45 minutes.
Somebody else said
45 minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, great guesses. It was longer than that. I was 2 hours over at the title company visiting, just chit-chatting. Now, if I had not been keeping track of my time, I would have guessed the exact same thing you did. Meaning when I went back over to my office, I probably would have looked at that and said, yeah, I probably spent 45 minutes or maybe an hour over there visiting with Jeff, but I would have justified it by saying, well, that's okay because, you know, Jeff and I are friends and it was good to catch up and see what was going on with him and yada, yada, yada. But because I was actually keeping track of my time, what I was able to see is that I actually spent 2 hours over there. Well, see, what happened then is I started to ask myself, is that really where I would want to spend 2 hours of my work day, is just sitting in the title company visiting with Jeff? Now, like I said, Jeff's a good friend, still is today, but like if I'm leaving to go to work, would I want my clients, my family, my wife, would I want them knowing, hey, today at work, I went and spent 2 hours just sitting there visiting and chit-chatting with Jeff? Like, probably my wife would have been saying, no, there's better things you could be doing with your time, which I would agree. All right, so let me go back. I'm going to pull this back up again here. Share my screen here. So work expands to fill the time available for its completion. See, what had happened is I had said, I'm going to go to work for X amount of time, and then I got there and was there for that amount of time, but I went and visited during that time rather than being effective with my time. All right, so that's where work expands to fill the time available for its completion. All right, next piece of this. So I said that he was studying the Royal Navy. Now this is what he found. So I'm going to get my mouse here to turn into this spotlight thing so you can see. All right, so what was going on was this. Now remember, this is 1930, so we have just completed World War I essentially by a little bit. And what's happened is now he's studying the Royal Navy. And you can see here that the number of ships that they had in commission in 1914 was 62. In 1918, that number dropped to 20. So they went from 62 ships to 20, which is a 67% decrease. The officers and men in the Royal Navy went from 146 down to 100, so 31%. Dockyard workers increased 9%. The dockyard officials and clerks went up 40%. And then over here, the Admiralty and officials increased 78%. Now, why would that happen? And again, I want some people to unmute and tell me what your thoughts are. Why would the number of ships decrease by 67%, but then over here goes up almost 120%. So we got 67% less ships, 120% more dockyard officials and clerks and basically managers over here. Why would that happen?
They created new jobs that required more people.
Perfect. That's right. Is what happens is if we are not careful. Now, this happens to you in your business as well. So keep this in mind. If not managed, what will happen is work expands to fill the time available for its completion, and we will create busy work. We come up with jobs that we need to do. So we come up with, okay, well, I need somebody to be able to do this, and I ought to have somebody be in my social media person, and I need to spend this much time on this. I need to spend this much time on that. Well, what happens is we then create this busy work that even though the number of ships went way down, the management side of things went way up because they just created more work. And that same thing will happen to you if you're not careful. All right, so that's the work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So that is his law of expansion. Now, here's the next one. The next one is Parkinson's law of triviality. So here's the other thing that he found as he was studying the Royal Navy, is that time spent on any item of the agenda will be an inverse proportion to its importance. So in what he found is, so in studying the meetings that were taking place in the Royal Navy, is that when they would go to a meeting, what would happen is they would spend the most amount of time on the least important things and the least amount of times on the most important items. Now, that is still true today. And if you will pay attention, pretty much any meeting that you ever go to, if you will pay attention, you're going to notice that same thing happens. Is that people, what we tend to do is we tend to do this. Okay, we're going to go to this meeting and we're planning the meeting and we are putting together the agenda and we think, okay, let's hurry and just put together and talk about the least important things first. And the idea behind that being, these aren't that important. We can talk about them real quick and then we can get to the more important stuff. Well, as you know, and maybe we're not consciously aware of, but start to pay attention. When you go to a meeting, any meeting you go to, this typically is what's going to happen unless someone is really conscious of it, is you will spend a ton of time on the least important things and very little time on the most important things. Well, so I'm going to give you another example of that. So let me pull this back up again here, of the Boston School District. Oh, actually, nope, I've got one other thing. Then we'll go to the Boston School District. Sorry. All right, the next piece of this. So this is another piece of the Parkinson's law of triviality. So law of triviality is we spend the most amount of time on the least important things, least amount on the most important. Well, a guy by the name of Vilfredo Pareto, he was an Italian economist. All of you have heard of the 80-20 principle. Vilfredo Pareto came up with this 80-20 principle. And what he was doing was studying these factories in Italy. And what he noticed is that 80% of the production would come out of 20% of the factories, and 20% of the production would come out of 80% of these factories. So he came up with this 80-20 rule, which is called the Pareto principle. And what he found is this. So if you look at this chart that I've created here, what he basically found is this. If you had 10 items that you needed to take care of, so these blue bars are here, are going to be 10 things that you need to take care of in your day. What he found is this is what we will tend to do, is we will put together this list of to-do things, and then we look at the to-do list and we say, okay, I need to do all of these least important things first because they're easy and I'll just get them out of the way so that I can spend all my time doing the most important things. Well, what happens is we do this red line here, shows the time spent. And so these two items here would be the most important, which I guess, let me make sure my thing, you can see it. So these two would be the most important items, but this is how much time we tend to spend on those items. And then these are the least important items, and this is the most amount of time we spend on. So looking at that chart, basically what it's saying is these are the most important we spend very little time on, but we spend a ton of time on the things that are really not that important at all to us. Okay, so how does that work with you in real estate? Here's what that looks like for you in real estate. What happens is we will go to work and say, okay, I'm going to do all of these 10 things today, and then we prioritize them. But the problem is we don't prioritize them by the most important things. We prioritize them by the things of like, I'm going to hurry and get this easy stuff out of the way so that I will have more time for the big stuff. And then the problem is we don't save time for the big stuff. It gets in its way. It gets in our way. The little stuff, we spend too much time on it and we don't ever get to the big stuff. All right, so now let me show you this Boston School District study. So what I'm going to show you now is a study that was done in the Wall Street Journal. And I'm not going to tell you the name of the study because it'll give away the punchline of what happened here. But what happened is this was in the Wall Street Journal about the Boston School District and their meeting. Now, question for you. Who makes up school district boards? Who are the people who end up on the board for school districts? Someone unmute and share with me.
Superintendent for one.
Okay, good. Superintendent. Who else?
Community members.
Yeah, typically it's going to be some school teachers. We're going to have some administrators from the school district, but we end up with a lot of parents that end up on the school boards because they just wanted to get involved in what's going on in the school. So what the Wall Street Journal did is posted this meeting and what happened. Now here's what was on the agenda. On the agenda was two different items. The first item on this school district board meeting was a $1.5 million annex. So meaning they were going to be building a new building and it was going to cost $1.5 million, and they were discussing who they were going to choose, which contractor they were going to choose to do it. The difference between the high bid and the low bid on that was $200,000. Now, I've got another $200,000 because that was the second item on the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is a $1.5 million annex. The second item on the agenda is a $200,000 item. Now, the first one was the building. The difference between the high bid and the low bid, I already told you, was $200,000. They ended up taking the high bid. So they chose the person who was going to charge an extra $200,000. On the $200,000 item, they discussed and talked about first. So remember, I said we tend to do these things in inverse order of their importance. So what they did on this Boston School District is they said, okay, we're going to talk about the $200,000 item first. The difference between the high bid and the low bid, if I remember right, yeah, it was $10,000. So the difference between the high bid and the low bid was $10,000. They spent 57.5 minutes talking about this $200,000 item and saved $10,000. They spent 7.5 minutes. Now remember, the meeting was supposed to be an hour long. So it's an hour-long meeting. They spend 57.5 minutes discussing the $200,000 item, and they end up choosing the low bid. They then spend 7.5 minutes on the $1.5 million building, and they choose the high bid. Now, so the meeting ran over. So just so you know, I get that my math is not there when I say it's an hour meeting. It went over. But they spent 7.5 minutes talking about the building and which contractor to use, and they chose the high bid. Now, the reason that they did this, if you understand this, will totally change the way you're going to approach the business when you understand what we're talking about right now. What would you guess that they were talking about for 57.5 minutes? Now, some of you on here may have heard this story from me before, and if you have, don't ruin it. But everybody else, give me some guesses. What do you think they discussed for 57.5 minutes and then end up choosing the low bid to save $10,000? What do you guys think they were talking about? So we've got some chat stuff here. Let's see.
How they're going to pay for the $200,000?
The difference for the other, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No. Nope, they were not talking about the building at all. So they had not talked about the building at all for 57.5 minutes. No consideration on that. Think about in a school, and again, keeping in mind you got community members that are here talking about this stuff. What are they talking about that saves $10,000? And then why would they then take the high bid on the other one, but $1.5 million?
They were trying to figure out what to do with the 10,000 and ran out of time.
Okay, so but what were they talking about? What was the item? What would you guess the item was they were discussing for 57.5 minutes? It was a specific item they were going to spend the $200,000 on. Somebody said their kids. Sort of, but not really. All right, I'll just give it to you. You ready? Here it is. Can you see what's there? It's in big demand right now too, so kind of ironic.
This just happened last week, Russ?
Yeah, exactly. The funny thing is I hadn't thought about that until just now, actually, as I pulled that up about with everything that's going on. But yeah, what happened is they spent 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper. Now, like as Rebecca just said, as I know, like right now, it makes sense they would spend 57.5 minutes on it. But go back to this happened before all of this took place. Why in a meeting like that? Now, this is the crucial piece. Make sure you understand this, because I'm telling you, this will be the difference in your business when you understand this. Why would they spend 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper, spend 7 minutes talking about the building, and then choose the high bid on the one and the low bid on the toilet paper?
Because they focused on the little item first.
Okay, good. But why? You're right. You're right on. Why? Why did they focus on that one first, though?
They thought it was easy. They thought,
Right.
hey, let's knock out the easy one.
Perfect. Good. Now, let me ask you this way. How many of you, now, and this actually, I was going to ask this question anyway, but how many of you in the last month have bought toilet paper? And I would guess you've at least tried, everyone, right? Now, so here's the thing. The reason they spent 57.5 minutes on it is because we're familiar with it. We all can talk about it. In a meeting, we could all sit and argue effectively about 2-ply or 3-ply and how should we get extra size roll, and is that going to be a scratchy or whatever. Like, we can all argue and talk intelligently about toilet paper because we're so familiar with it. Let me ask you this. How many of you, and usually in a class I would say by a show of hands, but how many of you wrote a check for $1.5 million in the last year of your personal money? See, and typically in a classroom setting, there's not many hands that go up that can do that. And so the reason that we will spend the most amount of time on the least important things is the same reason they talked for 57.5 minutes about toilet paper, is because it's familiar. We understand it. We can argue effectively about it. But because none of those people sitting on the board understand earthquake codes, they don't understand all the building codes, they don't all understand all that. And so instead, and again, keeping in mind, because it's parents, they're going to sit there and go, well, if we're going to build a building, we should probably choose the high bid because that's going to be safer for our children. Because they don't know enough about it to argue the other direction. So we can spend 57.5 minutes arguing about toilet paper, but we can't spend much time talking about the building because it was over their head. They aren't familiar with it. Now, the same thing happens with you and real estate. So let me ask you this. What are the things in real estate that you are the most familiar with? So give me some answers. What are the things that are easy? And especially, I know there's a bunch of you on here that are new agents. As a newer agent, any of you that are on here for that, what's the easy things for you to do right now in real estate?
Class.
That's right. Coming and attending class is an easy one. What else is easy? Justin's saying social media marketing. Good. What else? What are the easy things that we're familiar with that are not going to be scary to us? Come on, guys. There's more than that. So coming to class, good. What else? Facebook. Tracy, thank you. Yep. Direct mail marketing, awesome. Passive marketing, awesome. Yeah, good. All of those things. Now notice, paperwork, Leslie's saying yes. Notice all of those things are easy to do. And remember, we tend to work on the least important, most and longest, and the most important last and least. So what's going to happen is, because we're familiar with it, we know how to do it, what we tend to do is say, I'm going to hurry and just do this paperwork and get it out of the way, and then I'll go start doing what I need to be doing. But because work expands to fill the time available for its completion, we will fill our time up with these other things and not take the time to really spend it doing the things that are going to make that 80% of our income. So keeping in mind, 80% of your income is going to come from 20% of your activities. 20% of your income comes from 80% of the activities, meaning we spend the most amount of time, 80% of our time, on things that are only going to increase 20%. So when I was talking about Brian Burnett this morning, the reason he can make $1.4 million working essentially the same hours as you do is he gets this piece that we're talking about, is the stuff that is least important, he's not going to do it. All right, so now let's go to the next. What are the things in real estate that are least familiar, or maybe I could say even least comfortable for you?
Prospecting.
Yeah, good. That's usually the one that comes up the most, is typically it's prospecting, right? Now, what other things are least familiar? Is there anything else that would come up that you would feel like, okay, those are going to be a little bit harder to do? Yeah, good. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, listing appointments. So going out and giving presentations, and then Justin saying, talk about things I'm not educated in. That's exactly right. See, what happens is because we are not familiar with those things, we will do the same thing as the Boston School District, which is say, let me get this easy stuff out of the way, but then not realizing that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. See, if I go back to my story that I told you, the truth is what happened is I walked over to visit with Jeff because that's more familiar. When in actuality, what I should have been doing was on the phone prospecting for another transaction. But if I look at it and go, okay, I can get on the phone and prospect, or I can go over to the title company and order the preliminary title report, I'm going to go do that real quick. Then I'll get on the phone and we justify it as, well, then I won't have to worry about it. Now, this same thing for you guys that are working from home, this same concept is going to be huge if you are not tracking and keeping track of this and really managing it, because it's so easy. I remember at one point, this goes back about, how long ago? Almost 20 years ago now. I had switched from the company I had been with to a different company, and I was going to work from home. And I remember I started working from home and my income cut in half. And I was like trying to figure out, what am I doing? What's wrong with it? Well, what I finally realized is because I was working from home, my wife would say, I'm going to take the kids and go over to the pool. And I would go, well, I want to go to the pool. Or she would say, I'm going to take the kids and go to a movie. Well, I want to go to a movie. Or she would say, I need to run to the grocery store. I'm going to just leave the kids with you. Well, my oldest at that time was 4 or 5 or 6, something like that. And I remember being like, yeah, that's fine. Leave him here with me. Well, she leaves and goes to the grocery store. And now I'm ended up helping him with whatever. He was crying. He skinned his knee, whatever. As you know, if you're trying to work from home right now, blending those two things can be very difficult. So one of the things that I'm going to recommend that you do is, we had Kathleen Bruno on the Morning Ascent on Friday, and she talked about she's setting alarms to go off of, hey, this is when I need to do this. That way she can stay on track. So I would highly recommend that for you guys as well, is you're going to have to really be scheduling your time while you're working at home, because there are so many distractions, and work will expand to fill the time available. Meaning the neighbor's dog's going to get out and you're going to have to go rescue it, or you decide to go mow the lawn or whatever. Those type of things are going to get in the way if you're not very, very careful with structure in how you are planning this. All right. So let me get into now, let me show you how you do this. So I mentioned to you that I would track my time. So I would highly recommend, if you are working from home, doing this. But regardless, even once we're past coronavirus and we're out and about again, track your time. And you don't have to do this forever, but here's when you need to be doing it. Is one, just to figure out where's your time being spent. The second piece of this, though, is when you feel like you're in a rut. If you feel like, man, I'm in a slump. I love baseball, so I like to use the term slump. When you feel like I'm in a slump, this is exactly the spot you need to go to, is I got to start tracking my time to figure out what is going on. I have trained a number of people in this, and one of the guys that uses this probably the best is an agent here in Salt Lake City. He probably is earning somewhere in the $600,000 a year, but I was talking to him about a year ago about this, and he said, even still today,
if I feel like my business is off track, I immediately go to this tip analysis that I'm going to share with you guys. So here's what we want to do is TIP is an acronym. So the T stands for total time. So the T is your total time that you spend in working. And we need to be keeping track of that, especially if you're working from home. Create this separation between when you're work and at home, even though all of it is being done at home. Once we're past this, you still want to do this at the office because I'm telling you, it will be an eye opener. So you're going to track your time. And whether you do it in 15 minutes, half an hour, or an hour, like I recommend the 15-minute increments. I was talking to Sam Bell, who is now our president, used to be the company's attorney. And I was talking about this, and he said, you know, as an attorney, they have to do it in 6-minute increments. So for me telling you to do it in 15-minute increments is actually better than what attorneys are doing, because they have to bill it that way to their clients every 6 minutes. They've got to keep track of exactly what they were doing to justify it. So do it every 15 minutes, maybe half an hour could work, but you got to really make sure you're telling yourself the truth when you're writing down what you're doing. But at the end of the day, keeping track of how many total hours did I work. Now, the next piece of this is the I. The I stands for indirectly productive. And so it's not productive, it's indirectly productive. What that means is indirectly productive things are going to lead to the productive things. And then the last is the P, which is productive. So when we talk about, and you're going to hear me say P time throughout this, when I'm talking about P time, I'm not talking about the bathroom, I'm talking about productive time, okay? So your productive time. Now, what kinds of things would you say are going to be productive? So think of it like an attorney now for a minute. If we were going to track your billable hours, what are the things that you would guess are going to be productive? So I see Rebecca said calls. Calls actually are going to fall under indirectly productive, okay? So, and I'll explain that in just a minute, but doing phone calls or prospecting actually is indirectly productive, meaning they lead to productive. Okay, good. So now she said listing appointments. Good. Listing appointments is one. What else is going to be? Yes, writing contracts. Perfect. What else? Either unmute or type.
Showing properties.
Okay, good. Showing properties. Now, so on showing properties, that's if you have signed a buyer broker agreement with them, I would say yes, that's going to be productive. If you have not signed a buyer broker with them, I would classify that as indirectly productive. So it's going to lead to productive, but it's not productive if you don't have, if they're not a signed a contract with you as a client. Good. What else? There's a few more. If you can't get them, I'll give them to you, but just curious if you can come up with them. All right. Oh, first, let me actually, before we do that, so let's see, going to the title company, assuming you don't have friends there. That's good. I like that, Rebecca. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's going to be probably falling under going to the title company and ordering the preliminary title report. I'm going to actually classify under the N, which is non-productive. So let me explain the non-productive real quick. Non-productive, actually what that means is non-productive is not the same thing as not important. Now, make sure you hear that piece. So as I'm saying that, when I talk about non-productive, is not the same thing as not important, because there are things that I'm going to classify as non-productive, but they are important. Hold on. Sorry, nose was going to run there. All right. So non-productive is actually not the same thing as not important, although not important would fall under non-productive. Non-productive is actually just meaning that, like what Rebecca said of going to the title company, if it is something you could hire an assistant to do for you, then that's probably going to be classified as non-productive, meaning you don't have to be the one to do it, is probably going to be considered non-productive. So let me give you an example, and don't everybody hang up from the call off this, but sitting here in this class is something I would consider as non-productive because it is important, meaning it's important for you to sharpen the saw and learn these things, but non-productive because if that's all you did, so I like how kind of how Jeff Morris is saying it there, is that it doesn't lead to generating business. Sometimes though, we will justify like a mailing, we would justify that as being indirectly productive, but It's really non-productive. And again, the way I define non-productive is I don't have to be the one to do it. And if that is all I ever did, so let's talk about being in class. If all you ever did is attend classes, and there are some agents that is their real estate career, is attending classes. If that's all you ever did, you're not going to make any money in this business. So that's how I want you to think about the non-productive. If that's all you did was this particular task, is it going to make you money? And coming and just sitting in class, if that's all you did 8 hours a day, you're never going to make any money. So yes, you might be knowledgeable, but you're not going to make money. All right, let's go to the next here. So the next piece of this. So in terms of productive, so we're going to talk about what kinds of things were productive. We said listing appointments, buyer appointments, showing property to a buyer who has signed a buyer broker agreement. So when I said buyer appointments, that would be that interview that you're doing with them to get them to sign the buyer broker. Price reductions would be considered productive. Writing offers is productive, negotiating offers, and closing. Now, let me ask you this. What do those things have in common? So when you look at those things that I'm classifying as productive time, what do they all have in common?
They all have to do with selling a house or buying a house.
Okay, good, perfect. But what else? There's some stop and think about on a listing appointment, who's there? On a buyer's appointment, who's there? Showing properties to somebody who's signed a buyer broker, is price reductions, writing, like what do they have in common? Yeah, Leslie, only you can do it. Love that.
The customer is with you.
Perfect. That's how I want you to think about this productive time. In productive time is usually you are going to be face-to-face in a selling situation. So for me, I guess let me put it to you this way. I just said for class, you guys being in class, this would be considered non-productive time. Again, that's not the same as not important, but non-productive. But for me, this would be considered productive time because I am face-to-face with all of you agents right now, which is the most productive thing I can be doing with my business. So think of productive time is when you are face-to-face. Now, even though writing an offer, a lot of times we're not sitting there with the client anymore doing it, but you're typically going to have them on the phone or a Zoom call talking through it, okay? Same thing with negotiating offers, closing. All of those things is when we are face-to-face with our client. Now, stop and think about it for a minute. If you spend 8 hours a day face-to-face with different clients, going from one appointment to the next, what kind of income would you have in this business? And I'm not necessarily looking for an answer because I think it's obvious, but it would be huge, right? If you spent your whole day just going from one appointment to the next, that's why I would consider that as productive time. So remember I said I was keeping track of my time every 15 minutes. What I would do is that I would write down what I did, and then off to the side, I would classify that as either productive, indirectly productive, or non-productive. Now, in terms of the productive time, as I said, it's face-to-face in that selling situation. And so typically, you're not going to be writing that down as you do it. It's as soon as the appointment's over, you're going to go write down, okay, here's how much time I spent. All right, next. Next thing is indirectly productive. Under indirectly productive, which we kind of already talked about, is basically going to be anything that leads to productive time, but more so that you need to be doing it. Now, I know there are some people who have agents that are prospecting and setting appointments for them, which is fine, and you know, have no issue with that. So I guess what I'm saying is you could definitely hire somebody to go set appointments for you so that all you're doing is spending your time every day going on appointments. Now, to some extent, that actually would be really good. And in fact, Justin Udy that was on the Morning Ascent early last week, I believe it was, to some extent, that is how he built his team and his business, was he had these people calling and setting appointments for him. He actually even got to the point where he was removing himself from even going on the appointments. Was now having somebody else go on the appointments for him as well. But just keep in mind, indirectly productive are active things that you're going to be doing that lead to an appointment to go on a listing or a buyer, or, you know, leading to writing offers, those type of things. That's what's going to be indirectly productive. So as you're prospecting during the day and you're keeping track of where you're spending your time, what you want to be doing is writing down, okay, I was on the phone prospecting for the last, you know, and like I said, if you were doing that for a whole hour without stopping, at the end of the hour, you could write down, okay, I did 1 hour of indirectly productive time. All right, next. The non-productive is everything else. Really, basically, it's just anything else that you're doing. Putting together a marketing piece, doing a CMA, ordering the preliminary title report, checking up on ordering an inspection, like all of those things. Again, keep in mind, non-productive is not the same thing as not important. I'm going to keep saying that because I don't want, we tend to hear non-productive and think of it as worse than what I'm meaning it to be. It just means if that's all you do, you're not going to make any money in this business, is what non-productive means. And here's the other way that I think about it. Let me actually go back here for a second. If you kept track of it, and I would recommend that you do this, if you kept track of your income, so if last year for 2019, you said, I made $400,000, and you took the number of hours that you spent doing listing appointments, buyer appointments, showing property, price reductions, writing offer, those things, if you divided your income into just that, how much per hour would you guess, and I want some answers on this, how much per hour would you guess that you made by when you were doing these productive things? If you just took your income from last year, divided it by the number of hours you spent doing that. Bueller? No one? No one wants to guess even. Did I lose everyone? All right, Justin's saying have no idea. Rebecca's saying 40 what? Not sure what the 40 is. 40 hours? Oh, 40 hours on P time. Yeah, but if you divided that 40 into 400,000, let's say, how much per hour is it going to be? So Parker's saying like $250 an hour. That's going to be way on the low end. My experience is with this is you're typically going to be making somewhere between $500 to $1,000 an hour. So if you stop and looked at that of, hey, the amount of time that I spend on actual face-to-face in selling situations to the income that I made is usually going to be somewhere in that $500 an hour to $1,000 an hour. Now let me bring this back to, remember I talked about how can Brian Burnett make $1.4 million working essentially the same number of hours as you? Here's the difference. He understands this, even though it might not be on a conscious level, that the more time he can spend doing these items, the listing, buyers, stuff like that, the more money he's going to make. Now, here's the bad news. In order to get that productive time, we have to do the indirectly productive stuff. And if you were on the call today, how much time did he say he is spending prospecting?
Now,
6 hours.
Yeah, he said prior to a couple of weeks ago, he was doing about 4 hours. He's now doing 5 to 6 hours per day. Now, stop and think about that. If he's making $1.4 million, he spends 5 to 6 hours a day. He said he starts at 8 o'clock prospecting. He spends 5 to 6 hours a day. What does that mean in terms of how many appointments he's going on per day if he is home by 6 o'clock 75% of the time?
Well, he said today he has 2 listing appointments. So I'd imagine if he's prospecting 6 hours a day, he's probably getting 2 to 3 appointments a day.
Perfect. That's right. He's probably scheduling 2 to 3 appointments a day, which means he's spending probably 2 to 3 hours a day on actual appointments. So for him, if he were keeping track of his time, what you would see from him is that his actual productive time. So let's just, for the ease of the numbers, because this actually fits in, like I'm so glad he was on the call before we did this today. It couldn't have been any better. So if you looked at it and you kept track of his time, which I haven't explained this to you guys yet, but let's say he worked a total of 10 hours in the day. So he was 10 hours from when he got to the office till he got home, let's just say. So from 8 to 6, okay? So he was 10 hours. And let's say that he spent 3 of those hours doing productive items. Then of his day, what percentage of his day was productive? Perfect. Yeah, 30%. So he's 30% of his. So hold on. Now remember, I'm going to try this together for you. Remember at the start of the class, I said to you, there is no correlation between the number of hours you work and productivity. They're not the same thing. Working a lot of hours is not the same thing as being productive. This is proof of it. And here's what I have found. And I love that you guys heard it right from Brian this morning. The difference between somebody making $1.4 million a year and somebody making $100,000 a year. Now notice, he is only productive with his time, meaning he's only out in front of clients 30% of his time. So he's only spending 30% of his time productively. Now, reverse that down to somebody making 100,000 or even less. What percentage of their time in a day would you guess is productive? Any ideas? Yeah, Leslie's saying 10, David's saying 10, 0.5 is another one. Yeah, so here's the thing. That's right. Notice somebody who is just making about $100,000 a year is probably productive with their time 10%. Somebody making 1.4 million is productive with their time 30%. So if you stop and look at that, that's where I'm saying, like, if you go from being 10% productive with your time to 20% productive, your income's not going to just double. If let's say you're making $100,000 a year doing 10% productive, and you go to 20% productive, you're probably going from $100,000 to $500,000 or $600,000 a year in income by getting 10%, just a slight bit more productive. See, that's what I'm wanting you to see from this is the difference between these top producing agents and us is not so much that they work all these extra hours. What they do is they get it that my job is to spend 3 hours a day for him, saying, 30% of his time being productive. But in order to do that, since I've got this indirectly productive brought up there, what does it take for him to generate that 30% of productive time? Notice it's about double what his productive time is. So in order for him to be 30% productive, he's got to spend about 60% of his time doing the indirectly productive things. So if you're at 10% productivity and you wanted to go to 20, that means you probably got to double the amount of prospecting you are doing. Or, now here's the key thing, or you got to get better at setting appointments, because here's the thing that I will tell you. Most of you could set a lot more appointments than you're setting right now if you will fine tune your skills in not only asking for the appointment, but building lost the word I wanted to use, creating the value for them to get the appointment. Meaning you got to get that connection with them on the phone to be able to get it. So you don't necessarily have to double your prospecting efforts in order to get that kind of a return on your productivity time. A lot of it is just getting better at your prospecting. Because I promise you, I have sat there in a number of agents and watched one agent call a for sale by owner and just bomb. And the next agent goes, let me try it. Picks up the phone, calls the same person who was just rude, horrible, 2 minutes before, or less even than 2 minutes before, and this agent sets the appointment. Now, what's the difference? It is actually just how good they are using the script. So just keep in mind, there is no productivity. So I'm hoping you're not feeling discouraged, because I'm not wanting to create that. What I'm wanting you to see is to get from just 10% productivity to 20% is going to 4 or 5 or 6 times your income than just doubling it. So just small adjustments in the amount of productivity you spend lead to a huge amount of income. All right, let me get back here to this non-productive stuff. Okay, so here's the key. Now, so here's what I want you to see on this. This is the most important thing of what we've been talking about. Your productive time plus your indirectly productive time should equal 60% of your time. I'm sorry, I don't know why I put plus of your time. That should just been 60% of your time. So here's what I'm saying to you. When you take your total number of hours worked you want to be seeing what is the productive time and the indirectly productive time added together. So for Brian Burnett on this case, what you would see with him is based on what he said today, he's spending 60% of his time indirectly productive, 30% of his time is productive, which means 10% of his time is non-productive, is essentially what that tells us, is he's got 10% of his day that is non-productive. See, now, if you keep track of what you're doing during the day and you're writing that down, and every 15 minutes you write off to the side, was it productive? Was it indirectly productive? So I either put a P, an IP, or an N for non-productive next to it. At the end of the day, total up how many total hours you worked, and then from there, figure out what percentage of that time was productive time and indirectly productive time added together. Now, here's the key on it. If you'll do that and you can keep the two added together, productive time and indirectly productive time, if those two added together are 60% or more, you're on track. Here's what I'm telling you. You will start to see income coming in if you're not, and you will see it increase. If when you do your total time, it is less than 60% productive and indirectly productive, you're struggling. Now, remember I said that I have a friend that he's making $600,000 a year, and right now, even still today, he will, if he feels like he's in a slump, start tracking. This is what he's tracking. What percentage of my time is productive versus productive and indirectly productive versus non-productive. And as soon as he sees that it's dropped below 60%, man, now what do I got to do to change that? I got to fine tune it and quit doing some of this stuff that is non-productive. Because I guarantee you, every one of you, for me, when I started tracking this and I went home and I spent 2 hours over at the title company visiting with Jeff. I went, you know what? Is that really where I would want to spend my 2 hours? Or would I rather have prospected during that 2 hours and gone home and been with my family 2 hours earlier? See, once I saw that, that was a defining moment for me. Everything changed at that moment because I was like, I am going to fine tune this to where my productive time and indirectly productive time are 60% or greater all the time. Now, here's the thing. If you will track this, what you're going to find is that you will see that the more time that you can have that be 60% plus, the income will flow. When you drop below that, it starts to shut it off. And so if you will keep track of that and do everything you can to just increase those. Now, the reason that I do that and say that is if I go back here, if you're a brand new agent, and I know we've got a few of those on this call, like you're not going to have 30% of your time this week spent doing these items if you're brand new. You're just probably not going to have that take place yet. So what do you have to do? Well, what that means is in order for you to be at 60%, I got to just do more prospecting. See, I guarantee you with Brian, if he has appointments, he said typically between 1 and 4 is when he's trying to get his appointments scheduled. So if he's got an appointment at 1, 3, and 5, then I promise you he's not doing 6 hours of prospecting that day. He's doing 4. But you'll also notice that he's gotten, so if we said 4 hours plus the 3 of that, he's now at 70%. And I'm telling you, as long as your time can be 60% or greater between productive and indirectly productive, everything's going to be fine. Things are going to work out. I am happy to work with you and help you on any of this, any of you guys, if you will track it. If you will track your time and keep track of where it is. See, the nice thing for me is if you track this for a week, and a week isn't going to tell the whole story. You probably got to do it more like 2 weeks or a month. But if you sent to me, here's my schedule for the last 2 weeks and where I spent my time, I can tell you exactly what the problem is in your business. And all I need to see is what percentage of your time is productive, what percent is indirectly productive, and what percentage is non-productive. I can tell you the whole story. I know exactly what's going on in your business, and you should be able to do that as well, to be able to look at it and say, I see what I need to do. I'm spending too much time on these non-productive items that I should be spending elsewhere, and then you can fine tune it. Now, here's what I've found though. If you are doing a ton of indirectly productive, so let's say I'm a brand new agent, today's my first day, and I'm saying, what should I do? First thing you got to do is get prospecting if you're not. And we tend to want to do the familiar things. Well, I got to learn all this stuff first. No, get on and start prospecting. If you start prospecting and you go a week or 2 weeks and you're doing all this prospecting, you're not getting appointments, one of two things is the problem. See, when I look at your time, if you're getting 60% indirectly productive, but no productive time, and let's say that happens week after week, you're getting none, what I know is one of two things. Either you're not asking for an appointment, which is generally what it is people are not asking for the appointment. Is we get on the phone and we talk to people, but we don't say what time, which time, how soon, when, where can we get together. You're either not asking for an appointment or you're lying to yourself saying you're prospecting when you're really not spending that much time prospecting. Every time it's one of those two things. It's either you're not asking for appointments or you're really not spending the time prospecting. You've convinced yourself here that you are, but if you really stop and look at it, you're not. Now, if I see somebody that is prospecting and they're getting appointments, but then it's not translating into deals, same thing. It's one of two problems. Either they're going on the appointment and not asking for the business, they're not closing when they're on the appointment, or again, they're lying to themselves and going on appointments that they probably really have no business going on the appointment. Meaning, you might get good enough at getting people to agree to an appointment with you when in reality, they have no plans of ever selling their home. They just agreed to get you off the phone, something like that. But that's what I've found. If you will track your time, so I want to challenge you guys, track your time for the next week of, especially if you're working from home, like give yourself some set hours, talk to your significant other or whoever you need to talk to say, okay, at home, I am going to work X amount of time. Now, here's the good news. You noticed that I have not said anything to you about a number of hours you need to work. Now, you do need to work enough hours to be able to be effective, meaning you're not going to be able to do what I'm talking about by saying, I'm going to work an hour every day. Like that's probably not going to work. But you do need to be working enough hours. And I guess, again, I'm not going to define what that is for you, but I'm just telling you, it's more important than the number of hours you work is the percentage that you are spending productive and indirectly productive. That is the key. So whatever your time is, and again, you're not going to get away with it saying, I'm going to do an hour a day and I'm going to make sure it's 100% either indirectly productive or productive. Like that's not probably going to work. But if you'll do enough and keep track and you can see the indirectly productive and the productive time and you're at 60%, you're going to see business happen. And if you're below 60%, fine tune it to where you can get it to 60% because that is the key to this. So I'm going to challenge you guys over this next week, keep track of your time, see where you're spending it, and are you spending 60%? See, the good news is by me saying this, I'm allowing for you to have 40% of non-productive time, and you're still going to do fine and make a good income. Again, there is no correlation to the amount of time you work and to being productive. Instead, those small increases in productive time lead to huge amounts of money. I just already showed you, and you guys heard it from Brian himself. Essentially 3 hours a day or 30% of his time being productive leads to $1.4 million. So we just got to get better at our prospecting so that we can set more appointments. The more appointments you go on, the more money you're going to make, which is what makes sense. All right. So that's my challenge for you guys today. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to track your time? Are you going to figure out where it's going? Especially if you're working from home, figure out where that time is being spent and are you still being productive? All right. What questions? I want to answer any questions, things that you guys have, and then we'll be done. So either throw something in the chat box if you want, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions. Justin asked, is this recorded? Yes, I will get it sent out probably later today. I explained it that well that nobody has questions, huh? All right.
You're awesome, Russ.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your time. If I can help with anything, let me know. And please, like I'm telling you, if you'll track your time and you want to send it to me, I'll do an analysis and help you see what it's doing, because I promise you, that it tells the whole story and it'll get you back on track. So thanks for being here, guys. Have a great day.